Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Jason.
I'm a teen.
And welcome to the Elevated Convo podcast. We're so glad to have you here. For those that don't know, on this podcast, we explore contemporary modern issues through a spiritual lens. We reference religious texts, secular texts, and we try to use ancient wisdom to arrive at answers to some of the modern problems that we have in life. And we get write-ins from our listeners. Today, actually, we have a write-in from Jim. Jim is entering a new phase in life. Jim's beginning to think about finding a partner, and he sees a lot of sort of different influences online. He's kind of confused by all these different perspectives, and he wanted us to sort of take a look into some religious texts and see what we could find. And yeah, we're excited. We're about to get into all that right now. Why don't you start by reading the question?
Sure. So this is from Jim. As I begin to enter a new phase in my life, I'm beginning to get more serious about looking for a long-term partner. When I try to figure out the best way to go about dating and finding someone, I find tons of information online and from friends, and a lot of it conflicts. I'm curious what you two think personally about this topic, and also if there's any ancient wisdom about this in religious texts.
Well, thank you, Jim, for writing in. We appreciate it. And yeah, I definitely see what he's saying in regards to a lot of different perspectives out there. In like the sort of society that I live in, I find that the attitude towards dating has changed a bit. It's gotten a bit more sort of, I don't know, I think a bit more casual. I am certainly not here to tell anyone what to do, but me personally, he asked for our personal opinion. I think that some intentionality is worthwhile. And I think there's a reason why we have, for example, like marriage, it's been a thing for thousands of years. That sort of partnership, I think, is special. And there's actually a lot of quotes about that I found in different religious texts. So why don't we start by just sort of getting into that, and we can have some discussion around that.
Sure. Let's do it.
Cool. So the quote that I'll start with, and I'm a bit biased, this is from the Baha'i Faith. For those who don't know, Mateen and I are members of the Baha'i Faith. It's the tradition we grew up in, but the Baha'i Faith emphasizes, sort of like fellowship and understanding of all religions, which is why I've pulled from a number of texts today. But the reason I'm starting with this quote is it's so succinct, but I think it really just sets the stage, because, Jim is asking about looking for a long-term partner, and, typically that means marriage for a lot of people. And there's a quote by Baha'u'llah, who's the founder of the Baha'i Faith, who says, "Marriage is a fortress for well-being and salvation." I think, that is just such it's beautiful, it's succinct, and it's, I think, in many ways transformational from the way that we think about marriage. Unfortunately, like some people, like their partner is like, there's like the, stereotype of someone saying, "Oh, the old ball and chain," like I hope that people say that facetiously. But, nowadays, I don't know if we sort of give marriage this level of respect, a fortress for well-being and salvation. I mean, what a profound way of phrasing it. I mean, a fortress, when I think of a fortress, I think of protecting me from all the things going on outside. There can be God knows what happening outside, but inside the fortress, I'm protected. And then, of course, salvation as well. Do you have thoughts on this quote?
Yeah, it's I totally agree with that. It's a very strong word to use when Baha'u'llah uses and says fortress for well-being and salvation. When, again, you explain a fortress, I think of like a big castle with a big like moat around it with water and alligators. And so like this idea that like there's one doorway, there's only one way to get in. And that's with you and your love, your future wife or your husband. And so, it's not protection from ego. It's not protection from loneliness or chaos. It's really protection of your own, I believe, your own energy, and having someone in your life that truly works with your character, works with your personality. We always like to believe that there's like this idea of like chemistry, like, oh, as long as there's chemistry with that person, then I'm safe, or I'm good. That's good. I think that's important. In all relationship, there should be chemistry, but I really believe that we should choose the doorway that we walk into carefully.
Well put.
And so I think that that's plain and simple. If we can do that, and really, what does this mean? A lot of times when I say marriage, it doesn't mean that once you like tie the knot, this is now you're going to be building that fortress of well-being. No, I think this quote really means that like in the process of finding the person that you want to marry, that you have built that fortress before you complete the the end game, with them.
Sure. I think it's a continual process.
Yeah,
right?
I think I look at it like when you build a house, right? What is that story they used to tell us back in a kid with like, it's like the three little pigs and the wolf will come and like blow the house down. I think of that like if it's a house made of, straws, if a house made of haystacks, like it's not going to be that strong. But a house made of bricks, which is what your marriage should be made out of, is very difficult for things to blow it down. Outside forces, friends, even sometimes from within, little arguments can push you out and tear the house down. And so it goes beyond chemistry. It goes, there has to be a stronger foundation before things sort of like, complete.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think it's a continual process. And I think just like how with any building, like initially it starts off perhaps humble, and then over time, you maybe like add a wing to your house, or you do renovations, or, like double check that the foundation is still good. You have to sort of it's a continual process, because what happens if you neglect the maintenance on your, house? Then it can crumble, right?
Or what if you just don't build the house correctly from the beginning? Like
right.
I've been having some like plumbing issues in my place, and like thank God I'm like the person who built this place, had some sort of rudimentary like, baseline, because if they didn't, that one little crack would everything would explode.
Completely. Yeah, no, that's an excellent point as well. Like building without a blueprint, I think does happen often. There's an excellent book called The Defining Decade, which is written by a therapist who primarily sees people between the ages of 20 and 30. And after couple decades of seeing clients in this age range, she basically compiled all the problems that she sees most often with this group of young adults. And there's a whole section in that book on relationships. And the thesis of that part of the book is that people often, date someone just like, here's someone in my class, at my work, whatever, I'm just going to date them. And then, they kind of just date for a couple of years, and then eventually they're like, well, I guess we should get married now. It's a bit sort of unintentional. You can sort of go back and do the work, the intentional work, with someone who you just sort of met casually. But I think that like starting from a place of intentionality, as you say, have sort of a blueprint, know an excellent piece of advice I've gotten from a cousin of mine. She's like a sister to me, is like sort of have a list of things that you want in a partner, have like with your house, like if you like, hey, I need this in my house. I need this many floors, this many rooms, whatever. Versus like if you, start building, you're just kind of making it up as you go, in terms of intentionality, in terms of what you want, what you need out of that, then it I don't know. It's going to be a weird looking house,
Yeah, because a lot, especially with dating, or even, talking about, I think a house is a really good analogy, because we have to sometimes see it to be able to understand it. A lot of times with dating, we start getting infatuated with this person, and we sort of forget about this whole checklist. Like the checklist has to be that this person like needs to be a kind individual, needs to be an honest individual, needs to have good communication skills. And a lot of times when you sort of first see someone and they're like, oh my God, that person likes me, I like them, and you're like I can throw those things away,
right? But
then we kind of like see a year, 2 years from now when marriage is knocking on the door, and you still love that person, but you're starting to notice there's some things about them, or maybe they notice things about you that they didn't get. It's like when that person, didn't put that makeup on when you first see them, it's like you see them like a year later and you're like, whoa, what happened to you?
Sure.
But it's kind of like this idea at the end of the day. I have another quote that I want to ask to see what your perspective is. It's from the Quran 30:21. It says, "He created for you spouses that you may find comfort, and place between you compassion and mercy."
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I was so interested in looking throughout these different religious texts for quotes on, courtship, marriage, dating, whatever you want to call it, is because marriage is this like sort of institution, this tradition, whatever you want to call it, that's existed, throughout the millennia. I think it's a really beautiful thing. And the fact that you see mention of it, it's mentioned so highly in the Quran. I also have a quote from Ecclesiastes 4:9-10. Two are better than one, for if they fall, one will lift up the other. Like, it's so beautiful how you find so many mentions of marriage throughout all these different texts and how sort of like revered it is. And I think that that's something to pay attention to. Like one of the main reasons we do this show is because I think oftentimes people, particularly younger people our sort of age, maybe neglect the wisdom that came before them. They think like, well, the world is a different place now than it was 20, 30 years ago. And that is true in some regards. But I do think that, like I heard someone say recently, like the sort of details of the game have changed, but the rules are the same. Like there's like a new DLC pack, there's new skins, new whatever, new map, but like the rules of the game are the same. And I feel that way about courtship, dating, marriage. I think that people, I don't know, I don't want to generalize, but I see some attitudes out there where people sort of, I don't know, don't think of marriage as something they're like, oh, that's very old fashioned. And, we're not going to even if I'm with my partner for like 10 plus years, we would never get married. One thing that I can certainly understand, cause I have some, friends that have that attitude. And one thing I can certainly understand is, if you're a child of divorce, the divorce rate, unfortunately, is quite high. Yeah. And, I had a handful of close friends growing up, and nearly all of them have divorced parents. And that I think really brings it full circle to needing to be intentional from the get-go, because if you are, like you said, building a house without a blueprint, just figuring it out as you go, then you might find yourself in a situation down the line. And not to beat this metaphor to death, but like one thing is like, when you have like maintenance, like deferred maintenance, on your house, like if you ignore it, it only gets worse. Right. Yeah. Or if you detect a problem, like if you're buying a house and like you find a problem, like you should bail before you like make a commitment to that house and buy it. And then once you buy it, if you continue to neglect that problem, it's only going to get worse. The same thing is true here. Where if you, like find something early on, you're like, you know what, I don't think this is going to work for me, then that's fine. No harm, no foul, clean exit. But I think what happens is people, maybe there's something they don't, they don't love about their partner, and it kind of like irks them, but they just sort of ignore it. They push it away instead of maybe, I don't know, talking through it or whatever, or making the hard decision maybe that that person's not for them. And it builds and builds and builds and builds. And then, over time it becomes a huge problem, and then eventually it can lead to divorce, unfortunately.
Well, it's even before divorce. So people are not even getting, like you said, the other point is people are not even getting married. And there's this idea of, I think, fear, like, also like social media, also like the news. People are always like talking like, oh, your wife is always right. Like you're like, every time I hang out with a married person, they're like, just let her do the thing she wants. And I'm like, why are you guys living in a life like that? Like, is this what it is? Like, it just how like marriage is? Like, it scares me. Like, I wonder, like the young people are like, I don't know if I want to get married. I have no free will anymore.
Am I gonna talk to you in 10 years with your wife and be like, Jason, just let it do what you want.
Just don't do it, And so I'm very sad for all the children that are being raised. And it's like this constant domino effect. Like we tell, like the society tells them, well, don't get married, keep it casual, whatever. But then we wonder why divorce rates are crazy. We wonder why, like, children have, no good homes. Like things are going crazy in the household because there's no permanent set of who you turn to.
Completely. And to bring it a bit full circle, right? Like I understand why people are hesitant about marriage, the commitment that it entails, if they've seen bad examples of it, maybe in their own household growing up, maybe in adjacent households. And, I was just speaking about how I love looking for answers in religious texts because I think that young people our age discount, the wisdom of those texts. Why is that? I think, in a similar vein, maybe people grew up with, poor examples of religion, either in their own household. Like I can't tell you how many people I know that like, oh, I grew up kind of Christian, but I don't really, like agree with it or like the church or this, that. And, I can certainly understand that, but I think with both religion and marriage, a sort of bad example, like seeing a couple bad examples does not mean that, you should necessarily write the whole thing off. Perhaps it's just that like you haven't had, a positive example, and, it's an opportunity to sort of create that in your life, whether it be religion or marriage. And, a lot of the problems that we have in society, like for example, loneliness is on the rise. We did an episode kind of along those lines, and hopelessness in general, I think, is on the rise among young people. And, that's a very complex issue, and we won't get into it here, but I do think that religion can sort of, be part of the solution to some of those things. It's a shared community space. You have this fellowship, you have this hope towards a better future. The same thing is true, I think, for marriage. I think that marriage can solve a lot of the societal problems if we put sort of more sanctity on it, rather than going in the opposite direction, which is perhaps we have a generation of people that grew up with a lot of poor examples of marriage. So they've, some of them have sort of like written it off, so to speak. And in my opinion, that's, going in the opposite direction of where we should be going. And I think that these quotes, I think it's important not to discount, like if, this has been a thing in humanity for thousands of years, and so many people have had amazing, loving relationships. Like, I don't think it's something to just throw out.
Yeah. And I also really want to make important note is that often religion, it's not just religion, the tradition you come from, the culture you come from, dating is also seen as like a big no-no. Like, although marriage is like, marriage is really important, but it's like, we're not taught, especially in my situation, or maybe in my like household per se, like I was kind of told like, don't date.
No dating before marriage.
No dating before marriage. and it was like, it was a bit like, it was hard to figure out what was happening. Like right. I couldn't date when I was in high school, and I now understand kind of why. It really, I really do get my parents' perspective, but because of that, I was a bit behind for my friends, right. And my friends that were like already at stage 3, figuring out like what relationship was, what commitment was, all these things. I didn't know what that was, and I was still like falling behind. I was in grade 3 when they were like in high school, basically, like in this understanding. And so I highly recommend to Jim, like, go out there and go date, go figure out like all this checklist that your cousin was talking about. How would you know what that checklist is if you don't actually go out with people and figure out what pisses you off, what makes you happy, yeah. what works, what you want your children to instill, all these things. And so in modern dating, we've also figured out that extreme. We've like, oh, we have a social media, we have the Hinge or Bumble or Tinder on our phones, and our society has been really big on like just swipe right, swipe left, swipe right, like whatever that, if that person is not wearing what you don't want them to wear, if she's long hair or short hair, oh, swipe left. Like we become very like fixated on things that don't work out for us.
Totally.
And so that ends up getting in the way of dating and of marriages.
Completely. And that's a key point that I want to make. So thank you for bringing it up. Like, the idea that we live in this society that's centered on convenience. It's true of like materialism, where like, oh, you bought something and it didn't work. Like, oh, return it. Just don't worry about it. Send it back, buy a new thing. Like, don't worry about where it goes, or the fact that like we're going to throw it out probably, just like we'll return it. No big deal. Yeah. And I think in a similar way, perhaps one of the reasons why divorce is high, incredibly high, is because we live in a world where there is this abundance of options, where it's like, oh, like the person that you're with isn't working out. Well, there's like hundreds of people in your phone on these apps just waiting for you to sort of, look through. And that, I think, is one of the key things. Like, people perhaps are scared of marriage because it is a commitment. And, I don't want to discount the seriousness of that commitment. I don't think it's something to just sort of like, do frivolously. But I think part of it is that commitment, like the whole obviously point of it is that you are committed to each other through thick and thin. And when issues come up, it is that fortress for well-being. You've built over the years this intimacy, this trust. The fact that you both have made that commitment to the relationship offers a degree of psychological security, I think.
Right.
And when, there's a storm outside the fortress or even inside the fortress, perhaps there's, a bit of conflict. You can rely on that commitment to work through things. Right. Versus, if you are in a long-term like but, you're just sort of boyfriend, girlfriend, there is no commitment aspect to it, then, like you might just more easily throw in the towel, so to speak. Like I think that once again, some people think of marriage as old-fashioned, but I do think that there is that commitment thing is a part of it.
But and maybe you can answer this, like, why is it that like, individuals like that are in a relationship, basically like been together for 10 years, have children together, have sure. 2 or 3 children. And to them, that's not commitment, because you literally brought a child into this world that I don't know what more commitment there is. But then marriage all of a sudden is like, oh, that's a no. But children, yes, let's have children. Let's go with it, but it's like, I just don't get it. Like the aftermath of, let's say you guys don't end up working out and that child now has to be basically growing up with separate households. Yeah. I just don't understand the commitment side. Is it only when it's appropriate for you, like whatever you're feeling, like your emotions are tied to it? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think that like for a lot of people, particularly if you are non-religious and only think of like reality in terms of like what's in the material world, what you can see, touch, etc., like marriage perhaps seems a bit like outdated or unnecessary to them. Like they would probably, say, well, we don't have to get married. We don't have to like involve the government, as it were. We don't have, because that's the thing. Like if you think of it, like the world only materially, then like marriage is not like a sort of spiritual act of like, joining of souls. It's just like this sort of like, it's paperwork, it's like, oh, like our taxes go down a bit, and you just think of it very pragmatically. And you might think, oh, it's a bit old fashioned. We don't need to do that. Once again, probably like there's some sort of negative example of marriage in your head, whether it was in your household or maybe an aunt or uncle or whoever that, had a poor experience. So you shy away from it and you just think, oh, we can make our own commitment. And I could empathize with that perspective if you sort of exclude the spiritual aspect. But I think that once again, it's no coincidence that it's mentioned throughout all these different religious traditions. There's another quote from the Baha'i faith that I'd love to share. It's from Abdul Baha, who's the son of Baha'u'llah. It says, marriage is the commitment of the two parties, one to the other, and their mutual attachment of mind and heart. Each must, however, exercise the utmost care to become thoroughly acquainted with the character of the other, that the binding covenant between them may be a tie that will endure forever. Their purpose must be this: to become loving companions and comrades, and at one with each other for time and eternity. It's so beautiful the way in which, eternity. And in a covenant, like a promise, like a fortress, like it's that I think is perhaps what you're missing out on when you just say, oh, well, we're just like long-term boyfriend, girlfriend, like it's fine. Like we don't need, all that. Like I do think there is like just the way it's described, and interestingly, it talks about exercise the utmost care to become thoroughly acquainted with the character of the other. There's this idea, like the investigation of one's character is a common idea in the faith. And it's interesting how like I have a friend who told me a while ago that, she was, seeing some person and they had been like sort of like intimate physically with each other. And they like, after 5 or 10 dates, she started learning a bit more about him and found out that there was like something that she just like, could not get past, like some belief that she was like, no, I just can't be with someone that has that belief. and they ended things. But she, said that it was difficult because they had been, like
together physically.
Yeah, exactly. It was very difficult. And I brought up this idea of sort of investigation of character, the idea that like you are meant to, at least the way I see it, like investigate someone's character before you get physical with them. That way you can sort of do that work, exercise the utmost care to be intentional, to sort of have that blueprint, to ask the hard questions early. Because once you add in that physical aspect, like it's so much harder. Like the image that comes to mind is like things getting sort of like intertwined. And like when you have to pull that apart, if you have to pull that apart, it's so much more painful. And,
the dopamine and all that in our minds, that basically from excitement.
Yeah. There's like, neuropeptides that like,
100%.
Oxytocin that like, gets released in those moments. And when I brought this up to the friend, the idea of like, do the investigation before getting physical, she was like, wow, like I never sort of thought of it like that. And the reason I'm bringing this up is not to disparage that friend. I just think it's, indicative of how pervasive, these ideas of physicality first, figure out the rest later, are in our society, whether it's from media, the movies we watched growing up, et cetera. I think that, like it's fun, sure, to like make impulsive decisions and just sort of see where things take you. But like that fun can get you in tricky situations, like it did with my friend, where she had to sort of, cut things off, and it was painful.
Yeah, they were like in a honeymoon stage. Sorry, Jim, you don't know what that is yet.
Jim, you'll figure that out later.
Like a honeymoon stage, and it's like, the first 6 months, like it's just like lolly lolly da, la la land, like happiness, and then you're like, whoa, like there's actually some things we got to figure out, like who's paying the bills, who's doing all these things, financials come into play.
Sure.
I think a lot of times with casual patterns, when it comes to like just dating or just being with that person for years, I mean, I've no friends that have like dating for like 5 years at this point, and I'm like, you guys are basically married, and they're like, we're not. I'm like, well, you are, like in my book, and so it's like this idea that we have been trained like we're being trained avoidance, we've been trained low accountability, we're always like short-term thinking, when commitment's very important when it comes to relationships, because we start thinking about like, if I travel, if I move somewhere, like they are a part of me, they're part of my function, they're part of my life, they're my family. But when it becomes like this non-commitment when it comes to dating, they kind of become in the back of your mind, less priority. They're not seen as a soul anymore. They're seen as just another person, another body. There's some research that's sort of aligned with all this.
Yeah.
One of that is that there's a strong evidence that relationship satisfaction is linked to better health, physical and mental. And recent work even examines day-to-day links with well-being. So when you're in a relationship, it really plays a role. I mean, we know stress levels and mental health levels. And if you're being abused, or if you're being hurt, or if you're not feeling like you're being communicated, even on those are the extreme levels of abuse, but even the lower levels of crying to bed, like thinking I'm not being heard, or I'm being ignored, or there's a narcissist in the relationship, that hurts your general mental health. And a lot of times because we like the feelings that it gives us, even for a few hours in the day, we turn back to that a lot of times. There's like, oh yeah, we'll forget about the bad things, and the good things are only good. My family's involved, and my friends are involved, and all these little things, like you said, they're intertwined neurologically and physically. It's hard to separate. So that's why it's very important. We're talking about this conversation seems to be about long-term partner. There's, I think, two sides to this. It's like dating, which is really, really important. And then there's also, if you are dating someone, is to kind of go back and look at your checklist to make sure, is it building that fortress at the end of the day? And then the second thing I would say for a research angle, it says that it talks about like online dating. It says a large international study reported that couples who meet offline tend to report slightly higher relationship satisfaction / love than those who meet online. Any thoughts on that? Why do you think that is?
Hard to say. There's so many confounding variables when it comes to relationships. But some research that I've seen, which is interesting, sort of alludes to the idea of like the cheeky way to put it is like good things come to those who wait, you know, like sort of instead of like jumping into things quickly because they're fun, instead like sort of waiting until you're committed. So for example, what I'm thinking of, there's research around couples that moved in together before marriage versus couples that moved in together after marriage. They, compared like outcomes, like, okay, after however many years, what percent of those couples are still together? And, perhaps somewhat surprisingly, the couples that waited to move in are actually, sort of more successful in their marriages in aggregate. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. Like I said, there's a lot of confounding variables, as it were. But as we sort of close up here, I would encourage in general us to think twice about these assumptions, when it comes to how we're told to date, how our attitudes towards marriage. I think it's very easy for us to be strongly influenced by negative examples versus positive examples. We have a strong negativity bias. And if you think about, for example, the marriages within your family, your circle of friends, the ones that come to mind first are probably the ones that aren't working out so well, or maybe ended in divorce a while ago in an explosive way. But there are, of course, like many examples of hopefully happy, healthy marriages among your circle that you just maybe think about less because there's that negativity bias. Right. It's also just so easy to get swept up in these attitudes. And once again, this is not me attempting to tell anyone how to go about their life or how to do things. I'm just sharing my perspective today. But I do think, whatever perspective you end up on, it's worth deliberating on that and just sort of asking yourself, like, okay, have I been intentional about my choice on the way in which I want to date, the way in which I want to find someone long term, or have I just sort of been given this perspective by my friends and family, and I'm just sort of like following, what I see around me? I think that's a good thing to remember.
Yeah, I would add a few things, a checklist, practical checklist, intentions before dating, some questions that you would ask yourself. Am I ready to be the kind of partner I'm seeking? What are some non-negotiables, values that, and what are my preferences and styles? And then here's some character revealing questions I would also think about is, what does commitment mean to you day by day? How do you handle conflict when you are wrong? Because we're not always right. And what do you want your life to be about? Make sure there's purpose, consistency. You guys both don't need to say, oh, I want to go both travel the world, but there has to be some consistency. One person may say, hey, I want to, work every day, 80 hours a week. The other person may say, I want to just kind of relax and hang out and raise kids and a family. So you have to make sure those are aligned. Really just don't just jump into something and move in and do all these things and then realize, oh my God, this is not the person for me. That's okay too. A lot of people can realizing that sooner rather than 10 years into a relationship with kids is a lot more better than doing that the other way. But there's some green flags, that are virtue based. Realizing the person is that person he has humility. How does he keep calm during stress? And their emotional responsibility is very important too. And then some red flags is like vagueness, secrecy, contempt, disappearing, ghosting you, and all these other things that can play a role. So be mindful of that. Have an intention. Have a blueprint. Rely upon, I really believe, rely upon a higher power. Trust in them that they have your best intentions in mind, and then be good. Be a good person. Don't just cause havoc. Really be a good person, and great things do come to those that do wait and that are patient. And I do believe in that. So
yeah, me as well. Well, Jim, hopefully that was helpful. Thank you so much for writing in. We really appreciate it. And thank you for listening. In case you're not aware, this is a very young show. And if you enjoyed, we sincerely hope you did. The best way to sort of support the show is by sharing it with friends. We have no sponsor today. The sponsor's ourselves. So if you enjoyed the show and you can think of someone in your life who's maybe asking these questions, it would be amazing if you can share with them. We'd really appreciate it. And also, if you would like to write in, this is a listener submitted question. If you'd like to write in, there's a link in the description. You can DM us on Instagram. We would love to hear what's on your mind, what you'd like us to talk through, and we'll have that conversation together.
Yeah. Thank you for joining.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. See ya.